TimeSplitters is a franchise that has always seemed to be right on the cusp of making a comeback, but never quite making it. TimeSplitters 4 was cancelled, TimeSplitters 2 got a fully complete native port to modern consoles and PC, but only as an Easter egg in Homefront: The Revolution, and most recently, the Embracer Group, who I'm not allowed to give my full opinion on this early into the video without risking demonetization, closed down Free Radical, who were working on a new TimeSplitters comeback, which then leaked online even more recently, and just looked like Fortnite. Cool. Even fan games can't catch a break. TimeSplitters Rewind is a game that has seemed to be perpetually in development since I was a 13-year-old boy, and now that I'm a 27-year-old not boy, it still feels like we're no closer to actually getting to play it anytime soon. So with all the buzz surrounding TimeSplitters and games we are never gonna get to play, I wanted to make this video to talk about a brand new TimeSplitters game you can actually play right this second, and one I was surprised to have heard barely anyone talk about. Because for nearly 2 years now, a little game called TimeShifters has been on Steam, and it is such a cute little tribute to the original TimeSplitters that I just had to make a video about it. So here we are. Welcome to my video on TimeShifters. Released in 2022, TimeShifters was developed by indie studio Fawcett Gaming, and if you look really closely, you might even be able to see the inspirations it took from TimeSplitters. The menus are identical, the game modes are identical, the levels are all inspired by ones from TimeSplitters, and it even goes as far as to use the exact same sound effects as it too, which really makes you feel right at home the moment you start opening fire.
Perfect. Perfect.
It feels like a fan project that had the bare minimum amount of changes made to turn it into something they could sell on Steam, but I don't mean that to sound negative. I actually kinda love that vibe. It is unashamed of what it's trying to be, and leans into it in a really funny way.
Looks like it's time to shift.
And what it's trying to be isn't anything too ambitious, basing itself on the more simplistic game design of TimeSplitters 1, foregoing the more open, sandboxy levels of 2, and the hey, guess who just finished playing Halo level designs of Future Perfect. It's fast-paced and frantic, with every level being beatable in under 5 minutes as you cut your way through hordes of impeccably modelled and slightly brain-dead enemies, to collect some random MacGuffin. They absolutely nailed the game feel here. I had a stupidly wide smile on my face playing through the story mode. It's incredible to finally have a game like this playable with a keyboard and mouse. Quickly lining up shots with a flick of the mouse never stopped feeling satisfying, and all the guns are really punchy to fire, which you'd expect when the sounds and concepts for them all have been taken from a game with some of the best weaponry in the genre. It even has the same meaty slap sound to indicate that you've hit an enemy, making landing headshots just as gratifying as it was on PS2. The different time periods the game takes place in means you get a really great variety of weapons too, from vintage revolvers and near-future assault rifles, to ray guns and dual-wielded machine guns, and even silly things like chucking pints of beer at people, which is a nice nod to an average Friday night at Spoons. It's like I'm actually there. The game even double dips on nostalgia with some nods to GoldenEye with stuff like the Golden Gun and the 007 weapon set for arcade mode. The campaign for the game isn't very long. It took me maybe an hour or two, even when playing it across all 3 difficulties, but the variety really helped make every level feel fresh, even though they ultimately boil down to doing the exact same thing in all of them. Just like in TimeSplitters, once you collect the level's MacGuffin, hordes of new enemies spawn in to try and stop you. In the original game, it was the TimeSplitters, an alien race who use energy beams and shit to attack you, but here it's members of the Shifter Corp, a futuristic, fascist, Men in Black type secret company who seems to be staffed nearly entirely by Tommy Wiseau impersonators.
Oh, hi Mark.
I like them, they're cool, though one downside that I personally didn't like about them is that they drop their guns when they die. I've seen some people say that this was a cool addition, but I felt like it kinda detracted from the uniqueness of each level, because no matter what time period it takes place in, you're almost certainly going to just end up using some sci-fi weapon for the last half of it because they're so good. I think I would have preferred it if they either didn't drop their gun, or just didn't have a gun at all, either using energy blasts to attack you with, or even just spawning in more of the regular enemies the level already has. Or dress them up and pretend they're trying to poorly disguise themselves with the time period. Another way this game adds variety is by making each difficulty mode feel different, and the shifters are included as part of that, getting different weapons the higher difficulty you play on, with hard mode really testing your reflexes as they rip your body to pieces with sci-fi miniguns. The layout of the level also changes depending on difficulty, opening and closing different passageways and spawning more enemies in. The route you take through some levels changes massively between difficulties, so it's a really cool addition, though it does seem to be something that they kinda got bored with halfway through the game. Early levels like the pub and the mansion, their routes change dramatically between difficulties. But by the end of the game, barely anything changes between easy and hard mode. The only difference in Casino is that the vault at the end has more laser tripwires. Some levels like Car Park and Jungle have no changes at all, and weirdest, the level very obviously trying to be Siberia from TimeSplitters 2 doesn't change at all between difficulty settings, even forgetting to change the shifter weapons at the end of the level. I'm gonna guess it's a bug, and just for whatever reason it's just loading into easy mode every time. But I guess that does quite nicely lead me into something to kind of bear in mind for this game. It's kind of amateur hour as fuck, though thankfully not in any way that actually hurt my enjoyment of the game. Siberia's broken difficulty modes is about as egregious as it gets, but then there's broken reflections, bizarre reflections, broken effects, and accidentally loading up the console halfway through a level and seeing over 183 error messages staring back at me. It's a very inconsistent game, you could say. It definitely has the vibe of being made by a couple of 16-year-olds in their room somewhere in England, if the credits are any indication anyway. This one's even selling his book. It's a good thing his photo is 4 times as detailed as everyone else's, so you can actually read the cover. But I think the game owns that amateur feeling in a really comedic way at times. You've seen what the characters in this game look like. They're hilarious, and the antithesis of TimeSplitters, really weirdly horny characters, even when drawing characters that are technically underage, And the character animations when you select who to play as match that energy, some being really cringy, and others not even finishing their animations in focus. That has to be intentional, right? There's no way that could have been accidental. The game has a very playful energy, I guess, sort of anything goes, which kinda reminds me of the vibe you get playing the original TimeSplitters now, even if the art style isn't the same. It has this kind of low poly retro style, but not one that's trying to invoke a specific console. The closest games I can think to compare it to would be stuff like Lethal Company and Umurangi Generation. And honestly, I kinda love how this game looks, even if it is super garish. The colours are all fucked, everyone waddles about like they've shat themselves and are trying to get to a bathroom. The environmental details are fucking weird, and it all somehow comes together and kinda looks cool. Some of the little details like the football games on the TVs, or the bowling alley animations when you get a strike are really adorable. Honestly, the only thing I wish I could change about the graphics is to be able to run it at a lower resolution, in a sort of similar visual style as those games I said it reminded me of. I think it would suit the game's art style really well, and it literally already uses this effect, but only when using the RC pig. So, hello Fawcett Gaming, if you're watching this, please add that to the menu. If you do, I'll even buy a copy of your book as thanks and post a picture of me with it on Twitter. How's that sound? So if I had to rate TimeShifters so far, I'd say it's a little inconsistent and has a few rough edges, but the campaign mode is still a lot of fun to play through, and it definitely nails that classic TimeSplitters feeling when playing the game. But obviously there's more than just the campaign, there's also the challenge mode, just like it was in TimeSplitters. Play through a variety of challenges ranging from kinda fun to kinda boring, and get rewarded from bronze to platinum depending on how well you do. It has all the staples you'd expect, like behead the undead, but also some cute original ideas like the bowling alley and blackjack, which I imagine someone out there likes, but very much not my jam. I kinda just skipped that one. Or at least I would've, until I brought it up in this video and thus needed footage of it, so god damn it. I'll admit, I was never the biggest fan of the challenge mode, even in TimeSplitters. I always found them kinda annoying, and I pretty much felt the same thing about this game's challenge mode too, which I think is probably a good sign. Like, they felt about the same to me. And there's an absolute shit ton of them to play through too, so it's not like it's an underwhelming mode or anything, just I preferred to play other things in TimeSplitters, like the Arcade League, which, sadly, this game doesn't have. While you can set up arcade matches against bots, you don't get the same structured arcade matches like you did in TimeSplitters, which is a real shame, because it was by far my favourite mode in those games, especially with all the extra characters you could unlock by doing it, something which I think is also missing here. Now, to be fair to the game, it didn't originally launch with bots, so it couldn't really have had an Arcade League mode without them, so it's really cool that they went back to add bots in. But now I'm gonna be a massive dick and complain about them anyway. They're not horrible, but they're pretty brain dead, mostly just running about aimlessly and standing completely still when shooting. You won't see them dodging and weaving or doing anything nearly as smart as the ones in TimeSplitters could, but put enough of them into a match on a high enough difficulty, and it's still fun enough. While I'm here whining about the arcade mode, I might as well also say I was a little disappointed in the level selection here too. It's all just reused from the campaign, which is fine for some levels, but as a lot of them were designed to be basically hallways with one direction to go in, it does make some of them less suitable for multiplayer matches, feeling really restrictive and limiting the types of tactics to employ and encounters to encounter. You've heard of 3-lane map design, but your ass ain't ready for 1 lane, let me tell you. I think it also damaged the maps in terms of single player design too, like they had to straddle that middle ground. I imagine that's why the maps got less complex the further through the campaign you got, because you couldn't make the maps too complex with sprawling paths to follow because then they'd be way too big for multiplayer. Yeah, it's weird. I think it would have benefited both modes if maybe the multiplayer matches were still based on the time periods of the single player ones, but they were kinda their own separate thing with level designs actually made for multiplayer. Luckily though, you aren't just stuck playing with bots in this game, it has online multiplayer. Though if you actually want to play with other people, your best bet is to either join the TimeShifters Discord server, or to run a barely successful YouTube channel for 12 years and have 2 friends who for some reason keep saying yes when you ask them to play increasingly obscure games with you. Personally, I'd recommend the first one, and yeah, it's pretty good. Has all the game modes you'd expect from TimeSplitters, though obviously with 3 people we couldn't really play stuff like Virus or any team games. Probably no worse than the AI can play them, but you know. The addition of gun game here is really welcome though. We absolutely love that game mode, it's probably 90% of what we played. Matches are easy enough to set up with different options available, though we did find we had to back out to the server screen after every match. For whatever reason, the game would just break if we tried setting up a new game from the match finish screen. Apart from that though, we were able to play lots of games with minimal issues, so long as you don't consider one of us glitching under the map one time, or the fact the football mode seemed to barely work at all, or how everyone spawns at the same place at the start of every match, resulting in a massive clusterfuck every single time, as issues. But seriously, just sticking with the core game modes was still a lot of fun, even if some maps were definitely a lot more fun to play on than others. I had hoped to remedy that by making some maps for me and my friends to play on using the game's map maker, but sadly it seems to be very work in progress right now, having a fraction of the customization available that the original TimeSplitters had, and honestly it was a little too obtuse and finicky for me to actually want to use. The menus were really unintuitive, my theme selection didn't save, so I spent like 30 minutes making a map in the wrong theme and couldn't figure out how to change it without manually updating every tile. But there's definitely something there. Being able to put props and stuff down makes me think eventually it could become a really powerful tool, and even in this early balked rendition, people have still been able to make some pretty fun stuff in it to upload onto the Steam Workshop. I think if you could get a couple friends together, this would be an absolute blast to play with online, and probably 10 times easier to do than whatever the fuck you have to do to make an emulator work online. Something I've never been able to get work once in my life. TimeShifters. Probably the funniest name they could have come up with for this game, and it definitely sets your expectations going in. Yeah, it's kinda like supermarket own brand TimeSplitters, but when brand name TimeSplitters hasn't existed for 20 years, it still tastes just as sweet. While nowhere near as good as 2 or Future Perfect, I think you could make an argument it's at least on par with the original game it was trying to emulate in some ways. And for the massive cost of £4 on Steam, it was absolutely worth it to me. I would definitely recommend it, and while it's not the only way to play a TimeSplitters-like game with modern controls, more on that another time, it's definitely a breath of fresh air when you've played and replayed those original games so much you could navigate Siberia with your eyes closed. The devs have expressed interest in one day making a TimeShifters 2, and I'll be eagerly watching out for it, especially when the developers seem very LEXX Port Patrol brained, their previous game before this one being a Call of Duty Zombies-like. Very cool. So yeah, go give TimeShifters a shot. I think it's a game that deserves way more attention than it has right now.